Podcast. And at the Working Fans Podcast, this is just a podcast that 3 lifelong fans created to have a place to talk comedy and pro wrestling. Now, our comedy podcast releases every Tuesday, while our wrestling podcast releases every Thursday. We release bonus episodes under the moniker Working Fans Presents every now and then. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Breaker, any major podcast provider. The important thing is just please like, rate, review, subscribe wherever you listen to us. Now, we have started a new thing. We are now on Amazon and Audible. So those episodes release every Monday. And that's kind of going through the archives and just releasing our old episodes into new areas. So if you want to live through the process with us again, take that journey with us again, you can find us over on Amazon and Audible. Now, if you can't get enough of us in the audio form, check out our YouTube. It's youtube.com/C/Working Fans Wrestling Pod, or just search Working Fans Podcast on YouTube. We have the whole archive is up there. And if you listen to the Working Fans Podcast, you are more than familiar with the 531. That is our signature segment where we take your top 5 lists on a particular subject, vote it down to a top 3, and then debate it down to a top 1. Now, guys, if you want to hear 3 guys talk shit about comedy, wrestling, life, anything, you will enjoy the Working Fans Podcast. Fans, welcome back for another week of Working Fans Saturday, episode 32. We are brought to you by 482 Designs. That's FOUR82 Designs at gmail.com. Dave, AJ, how are you doing? We are just short of 100 episodes on the podcast.
Ooh, wound up, baby. Ready to get going. Let's do the damn thing.
I'm fired up. Tonight we got Cyril Gane versus Alexander Volkov. If you are not excited for this UFC heavyweight fight, the undefeated Cyril Gane. Oh, am I on the wrong show?
Nah, motherfucker. You did good. I like it. He looked up some shit real quick. All right, yeah, that's right. So we're
now,
talking
tell people what released today.
All right, the Combat Cast, episode 1. Me and my buddy Chevy released today. We got episode 2 already in the books coming out next Saturday. Obviously, my love for MMA and some of what spawned that is today's guest, the host of Cage My IQ, Mr. Dan Bakley, who's coming on. And we're going to talk about MMA fighters turned pro wrestlers. There's my man right there. And, so that show dropped today. We're going to have Mr. Bakley probably on as a guest at some point. It will take time. I am a shit show when it comes to getting things together. But, yeah, man. AJ obviously did his brief USC homework. He looked up today's card online. I appreciate that. And, but I'm excited to talk about the Combat Cast. I'm excited to talk to Bakley about Cage My IQ. And we're going to talk about MMA guys, girls, turned pro wrestlers today. And I think me and Dan are going to put a little slant on that, too. We talked about yesterday.
Dude, Randy Osga asking questions. Absolutely, we got that new MMA podcast for you, Randy. So tune in and don't miss a show.
You already subscribed, Randy. It should be in your shit. Look in there today. So
he was all disappointed when we got the man back.
AJ's a great guy. Hey, we have another commercial to go to. Wow, man. We got something else to do? Because I'll just hop into this motherfucker here.
Wait a minute. Do we have a commercial about me being a great guy?
We can't lie to the people, brother.
We're live, pal. All right. Well, let's fucking hop on it then, man. Before we get going with our list, I want to talk to Dan about this because we brought this up yesterday. A little conversation we had. We were talking about people that were actually in MMA, that had MMA fights and did pro wrestling. But you had an interesting slant on it. Maybe people who trained MMA, which would totally change our list.
Yeah, definitely. Because a guy that came to my mind, who I brought you, was Kyle O'Reilly. Because he has that big background. He still trains. He does kickboxing, Muay Thai, and all that. And it's crazy to think that he's never fought like in MMA before, but he has that big background, and he basically uses it for wrestling.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with his former partner, Bobby Fish. I mean, Bobby Fish's style is just completely combat wrestling. I love that style. You saw a lot of it in English wrestling. You saw a lot of it in Japanese style wrestling. That strong style emanates from combat wrestling and the working fine line between what they do between a work fight and a work shoot, and it's absolutely incredible.
Now, Dan, I'll get your opinion on this. I was thinking about this afterwards because MMA is mixed martial arts. Like people tend to think UFC, right? But so, like, your elements of martial arts, we've learned that wrestling is a martial arts. And, like, would Kurt Angle qualify for a list like this if we were doing it, not someone who had an MMA fight, but had a training? I mean, he had training.
Yeah, he might have qualified. He actually was offered to do it back in the day, right as he was starting WWE, but he chose not to. And he said that's one of his greatest regrets was to not try it out because he felt like he could have been a good prospect in the world of MMA.
Especially at that time. I mean, now MMA has evolved so much that it's not necessarily the wrestlers, it's whoever can institute their own game plan, we've learned. But back then, especially, wrestlers were dominating. Like, the stand-up guys really didn't know how to, like, deal with these wrestlers who were taking them to the ground. Now we learned that now is becoming truly mixed martial arts, and people that are well-rounded are the ones who are doing better, with the exception of a few specialists like Habib and stuff. But Kurt would have been great.
Yeah, the judging has changed too to make it more easier because back then that they've had it so like wrestling heavy, and now they've made it so that it's kind of 50-50 for striking and with the ground game.
Well, it also seems like a lot of the people that are in mixed martial arts these days have also figured out that you have to do more of the promotional side. You have to have more of an entertaining personality. You have to be able to actually project who you are to get those big fights, because you could be the greatest fighter in the world, but if you bore the shit out of people, people don't necessarily want to see it.
A guy I think of is Colby Covington. He's done that to like the 100th degree with his personality, his persona that he's created, which is why, like, the thing I found out was I never realized back when Lashley was in Impact that Colby Covington made an appearance on Impact, and I think he actually wrestled.
You know what's funny is people, especially MMA fans, don't like to realize the similarities between MMA and pro wrestling are way more similar than people think. And I think that's why if you look at the old days, like UFC's slogan was basically as real as it gets, because they didn't want people confusing this with pro wrestling. And, you know, you're going to a market of people who don't want to watch wrestling because they think, oh, that's that fake stuff. So it's like, no, hey, we're real here. But there are similarities in storytelling and personalities. And there's still, if you're a casual person, like there's this girl I've been talking to, she was telling me a story. She knows I like MMA, and she's getting her kids like a haircut or something, and they're watching it, and they're like, "Mom, is this wrestling?" And she's like, "No." But you know, like people don't know sometimes. They get confused. If you don't like pay any attention to this stuff at all, you might just strike it as no. But there are similarities, and that, you know, goes into like the storytelling and the big personalities, like a Conor McGregor, a Colby Covington, like you said.
Exactly.
So one of the things that, and the reason why Colby Covington showed up in Impact was they were actually training in the same gym at the time when Lashley was actually doing MMA during that time period and having the fights. They were fighting under the same training. So it enabled him to actually come in and get an idea how to make money. And it's amazing how Dana White had those slogans until he saw the purse come in from those Brock Lesnar fights. And then all of a sudden went, whoa, wait a minute. I can make even more money?
Yeah, that's actually a good point. Brock really kind of started that, getting that professional wrestling fan base at these shows at that time, because there was a big wrestling was so popular still back then. It wasn't attitude level popular, but we were still on a high, much popular than we are now. And that fan base, super loyal. They're going to see Brock, who we know is a big, strong badass with amateur wrestling background. And there's other people showing up too, to like, again, the people who are hardcore is like, we don't want this fake wrestler coming in here. And of course, Brock showed you that, oh, he's not just a fake wrestler. He might put you on your ass. And he did very well in that time period.
And there's a certain way they booked him in the UFC where they didn't put him against a lot of strikers until he already had the belt. They put him against a lot of grapplers, a lot of submission guys, because they didn't want to ruin it right away.
Sure.
Yeah, as a former national champion in collegiate wrestling, obviously versus grapplers, he was going to do very well. And I think a lot of us noticed, obviously, that he wasn't going against the big-time strikers, because unfortunately, when you keep your head up the way that he does going forward, it gives him a very large target to get hit.
And Randy in the comments, like, he remembers watching Lesnar Couture fight, and that's interesting because actually, too, kind of a stroke of luck. Couture beat a champion at the time. Lesnar matched up very well, because Couture was a wrestling-based guy, but also a lot smaller than Brock. So stylistically,
oversized him.
UFC kind of lucked out in that. Yeah, and that worked out being kind of a big money deal.
And it was on the end of his career, too. It was one of his last fights before he did the James Toney boxing crossover.
Right.
Yeah, unfortunately, it really was not Randy Couture in his prime.
No. But you know what? I think let's get to this list. Joe, you've been quiet, so I'm going to have you kick us off here. Give me your top MMA guys turned pro wrestlers or girls.
So for my list, I've got Dan Severn, Tom Lawler, Matt Riddle, Ken Shamrock, and Brock Lesnar.
Okay, solid list. A couple guys I didn't include was Filthy Tom and Matt Riddle, who both have great personalities and made great transitions. And I thought really, in terms of an in-ring wise, brought that element. Like they really adapted to wrestling well.
I'm going to surprise you, Dave, a little bit. I did not actually have Dan Severn on my list. I don't feel like I know he was an NWA champion, but to me, he did not transition personality-wise into the world of professional wrestling in the way that you would actually want him to. I think some of it was the way the WWE packaged him. They made him boring as shit.
Well, I mean, they did want to do that cool thing with the ministry and have symbols painted on his head, but he didn't seem like he was too interested in that. So
and don't get me wrong, obviously Dan Severn is a legend in MMA, and we talk about that early grappling and that style and how it was huge in the beginning of UFC, and that's what Dan Severn is, and I just didn't think he translated as time went on.
Yeah, I can see that. Go ahead, what's your list then? Let's hear it.
All right, so my list, I do have Matt Riddle on. I think that he is coming a far way. Ken Shamrock, I think people forget that he actually started in pro wrestling before MMA and then went back to pro wrestling. That's and then you also have on my list, not Kensuke Sasaki, Shinsuke Nakamura. Shinsuke Nakamura has had a good amount of MMA fights in Japan and enjoyed mixing up the combination. One of the early people to do a version of MMA and wrestlers, actually legendary Antonio Inoki. And so I have him on my list. And then my last one is actually Brock Lesnar. I think you have to put Brock on there.
No arguments here, man.
And I didn't include Minoru Suzuki.
Yes.
Yeah, that's another great one.
Bakley, I'll let you go next, man.
My first one is Shayna Baszler. Everybody forgets that she did MMA, then came over with. It's always overshadowed because of Ronda Rousey. I didn't put Ronda on the list because she only did 1 year of basically wrestling, so I thought that wasn't enough. Even though she had a big impact. I got Tom Lawler because he was in the UFC for about 10 years. He actually got noticed every weigh-in. He would do like a wrestling pose each time to get himself noticed. And he built like a big rep in UFC before he left for MLW and New Japan. Then I got the shocker one I have on here, Alberto Del Rio.
That's right.
And had one because he wore a mask when he did it. Then he came over and came to the WWE and then did a little bit of Impact. Then I got Josh Barnett. He came over. He wrestled. Well, he did MMA.
That's a good one.
And now he does blood sport and does commentary and everything. He's crossed over very well. And then, of course, I got Ken Shamrock. He's the most known one. And doing UFC big time, started from number one, had the big legendary feud with Royce Gracie going on with that. That's what built the sport, was them two before they got to Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz. And then he transitioned over to WWE and then, of course, Impact now, and he's made a career out of it.
Man, I got to tell you, one of the great things about the 531 is how challenging it is. And when you hear other people's lists and you go, oh my God, I would have loved to have had that person. And then where do I fit them?
Yeah. Right. That's what I was thinking with Barnett. I don't have Barnett on my list, but I kind of wish I did. And if I went back and looked at this, I might.
Same thing with Shayna Baszler.
Yeah. Same thing. A couple honorable mentions real quick. I will mention Dan Severn. He did not make my top 5 for similar reasons that AJ had. It's the entertainment side. But I do respect Dan. He's one of the OGs. Minoru Suzuki, another guy. I know Jake would want him on there. But when I look at my list, I brought people I thought there were some heavy hitters. And I'll get right to it. I'm going to go first off Ken Shamrock. I think that's one guy we all had. He's the OG. He's the guy. He trained with the Malenkos, with Professor Boris Malenko. He was ready to go. And he ends up being one of the most badass MMA fighters and one of the most badass pro wrestlers ever. Still doing it Impact as of last year. Ken has to be on this list. I'm like Bakley. We're having a little bit of a disagreement here. I did put Rousey on here, and I like what he said about not doing it for a year. I will just counter that with, though, WrestleMania main event, first time in women's history. It doesn't get done without her. So in that aspect, she's going to get my vote. Bobby Lashley, solid MMA career, winning record. But you know what? He's a world champion right now in WWE. And he's getting it done. So he made my list. Brock Lesnar, I agree with AJ. How do I not have him on this list? This is the guy who really started to make the UFC. He helped usher in that era. You look at UFC 100, George St. Pierre gets a lot of acclaim for pushing that, but Brock was on that pay-per-view as well. And I think it was one of the rare times too, Dan can back up on this, that a welterweight actually headlined the pay-per-view. It wasn't the heavyweight title fight, I don't believe. But Brock was still on there. A lot of fans tuned into him. And I put Jake Hager down because even though Jake's MMA career is at the time, I probably would have put Barnett if I had thought about it. But Jake has went on, and he was a world champion in WWE. And for that reason, I kind of made sure that he made my list.
So I want to mention something real quick here. We didn't mention Rampage Jackson either.
Yeah.
Rampage Jackson had a nice little impact.
What do you guys think about Steve Blackman?
He was
another badass.
He has a gym right now in Harrisburg, PA, and he trains people out of it, and then he runs like a small MMA promotion right outside Harrisburg.
Another one out of Toronto is Santino Marella. Santino Marella actually has a hell of a judo background and trains people.
And he has a cobra.
And this isn't limited to nowadays, because if you go back, Roddy Piper has talked about him, Ronda Rousey has talked about him, Judo Gene LaBelle.
God damn right.
Yeah. I mentioned that a couple of weeks ago. I watched the documentary and I'm like, geez, I never knew that they were both trained by the Piper and Rousey were trained by the same person.
Right. And what's interesting is Gene LaBelle, I mean, we're talking about the old school. Like, he trained Chuck Norris, like some of the original martial arts guys and stuff like that. And I know he always said that Chuck Norris would have whooped Bruce Lee's ass, but I don't know about that with all due respect to Judah. But hey, and again, he knows more about martial arts than I do, so who am I to argue?
Guys, we have a new fan of the show. He's actually he's the third baseman for the Hartford Yard Goats, and he actually just text messaged me with a little breaking news. He said that he would actually love to see the Diaz brothers go into pro wrestling with the personalities that they have. The transition from MMA to actual professional wrestling, he feels would be a natural for him.
They wouldn't be in a PG product, I'll tell you that much. They would have a real hard restraining those guys. And
you're gonna have every fight Nate Diaz bleeding because he has all that scar tissue on his head. Yeah. Because then he gets touched up once and he bleeds.
The Abdul the Butcher of MMA.
Yeah, Matt is originally from the Stockton area, and he said those guys are just legendary in that area.
Probably knows the Stockton slap then. Be sure to watch my words around him. I'm going to say we're going to kick off.
Now, before we move on to our
Combat Cast?
I was going to say, before we move on to the top three, what federation do you think has treated MMA the best? Obviously, GCW has done an awesome job with Bloodsport, but MLW has represented it. Impact has had it all in their product over the last, I'd say, 5 years or so.
If you're talking about
who do you like best that's represented
in its pure form, that's tough.
I mean, I don't think anybody does it better than New Japan.
I was going to say it depends. It depends on if you want to go quality or quantity. I think quantity, it would be between Impact and New Japan. But if you want to go quality, you might go WWE because of just having Ken Shamrock there.
Sure.
He's the big noon guy. But you've had like Impact where they've had Tito Ortiz appear. Not long, but he appeared on there. Rampage Jackson, King Mo, like Bobby Lashley, even Alberto Del Rio for a little while. You got a bunch of names that they've had on there for a short period of time. Even Colby Covington made an appearance on there. If you want to go quantity, you got to mention Impact, but I go with the quality with WWE.
Speaking of Impact,
Tanner Gray. First off, get in my DMs, buddy. We might have you on a combat cast. This guy's looking for a fight. I want to hold on, AJ. I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I do want to just piggyback off of something back a little bit. WWE. I know what he's saying. Like, if you look at terms of like who brought MMA to the forefront in wrestling a little bit, you do have to look. They had the money, so they have the big names. They have the Shamrocks. They have the Rouseys. They have the Brock Lesnars. But if you're looking at it for who treats MMA with the most respect and who puts an emphasis on it, I don't know if I can go WWE or not. I mean, they like to just highlight it whenever it suits them. Yeah. That MMA background that so-and-so had, it's like, okay.
Yeah, the WWE also almost killed it with the freaking Brawl for All. One of the worst
that's a totally different concept together, man. I think we're going down a different story with that. I mean, they almost killed their roster with that. That was not a.
Hey, to bring up what Bakley was talking about earlier, somebody who I'd like to mention along with Kyle O'Reilly is this guy, Josh Alexander. Josh Alexander in Impact reminds me of that style that we were talking about, and I love what he brings to the ring in Impact.
Guys in the past, like the Steiner brothers too, Rick and Scott.
Oh, absolutely.
Badass with that wrestling background. So you said Alexander. I thought of the headgear. I made it think of Rick. But
well, plus what they can do with a Sharpie.
He's like the Steiners mixed in with Kurt Angle, like with his appearance, and then he got the ankle lock. He just reminds me of like a mixture of both of them.
But we should get Terry Gray got some hot takes. God damn.
Yeah, come with some fire in the comments section today.
Oh shit, man. We need this guy. So let's kick it off though. I think Shamrock's gotta be in our final three. I don't know, man. I think Lesnar was another guy that made it. And let's discuss this third possibility. Fuck. What do you guys think? Barnett?
Yeah, I love Barnett. I'm pissed off that I didn't put him on my list, quite frankly.
I think Barnett's a good pick. I would have liked Suzuki, but I left him. I left both these guys off my list. So I think Barnett's a person.
maybe a couple of years ago you might not have him, but with what he's done in the past couple of years, he's been big with just building Bloodsport. He was doing commentary for New Japan, and then you already know what his MMA career was. So
yeah, we all love Bloodsport here. We've been to the live events. We love watching it every time it comes out. Josh Barnett has done a tremendous job with that.
Yeah, I think Barnett definitely deserves it. He's a guy that could go farther. I'll say this: I think I'm going to boot him first, but here's why. I think when you look at Kenny, he's an OG, and I think Brock has been the WWE champion and a UFC champion, so that gets a lot of consideration. But I will say this: I will say Barnett has done more for professional wrestling in MMA than anybody, to the point that. And Bakley will probably back me up on this too, that I saw an interview once with him where he basically was talking about, I think it was back in the Strikeforce days, they would ask you to put your fighting background down. And Barnett would actually, for legitimacy, always offer to put pro wrestling down. And they would always end up changing it on him, putting like Brawler or something like this.
First
Barnett
of all,
is all about making things make sense. And that's the respect factor he has for pro wrestling. And that's why I appreciate Josh.
I love Strikeforce. I think Tito Santana and Rick Martel did more for MMA than any. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Arrogance, baby.
See, that reason for booting Barnett would be the very reason I'd keep him. Is even though Lesnar was a champion, I would boot him first because the respect that Josh Barnett shows to both sides of the coin, both MMA and pro
That's
wrestling.
a great point. Let's define what we're trying to figure out here then. Is this the biggest MMA star ever, to go into pro wrestling? Or what's today's topic? Remind me, how did we word this?
To me, it depends on, do you want to go for biggest draw? Because Lesnar was a big draw in the UFC,
right.
But I don't think talent-wise in the UFC, he was one of the best. I think he was middle of the road. I think they highlighted his strengths and then booked him against guys that they knew he could win right away. Sure. And then when he fought against Cain Velasquez, you saw what his weakness was because they had to have him fight him. It was like they couldn't keep him away from him longer. Kind of like Rousey, where she fought Holly Holm. She couldn't fade away from a striker in that side of things because they kind of hit Ronda Rousey's opponents. They did the same thing with her.
Yeah, especially at that point with women, because women were just starting out in MMA, and we didn't have to go around. And go ahead.
Holly Holmes also, with the height, had that reach, so she couldn't get away from the strikes. So it was very hard for her to get in on those strikes.
And sidebar, MMA game planning and Coach Wrinklejohn and everybody that got her ready for that fight, had the best game plan. And Holly's takedown defense was super in that. And once Rousey couldn't get her down, and honestly, Ronda's game plan sucked. Once she decided she wanted to strike with a boxer, it was like, oh my god, this is the perfect storm.
And then a side note on that, now they're training Clarissa Sheards, who's coming from the world of boxing, and trying to do the same thing with her, get her ready for the MMA. She won her first fight, and now she's fighting again in August. So maybe they know something where they can transition these, whether it's a wrestler or whatnot, to MMA the best way.
They're hopeful. I mean, you can get some name value out of them, but it's tough in MMA because unlike pro wrestling, we can't just book the finish a lot of times. Yeah. And the issue with that is especially on the women's side, because there's a lot of great talent that's starting up, but in that regional scene, it's all across the board. And you can tell the fights are probably going to build for Shields. Is she going to get hot-shotted in a fight with Amanda Nunes? If she gets in the UFC and she's only had 4 or 5 fights? Well, that's not an easy task.
That's
What do you think's harder to transition from wrestling to MMA or MMA to wrestling?
I would say most likely MMA is harder to transition to because you're dealing with a real fight situation. However, I will say there are variants to that. There are times where you can have a great fighter who doesn't really adapt or understand the concept of pro wrestling. Dan Severn would be a great example. He was solid as pro wrestler, but he didn't adapt and excel at it, say, as a Shamrock or Kurt Angle, who were able to do the personality side and everything. Wrestling is so heavy on entertainment, and you know, you kind of got to check also that ego at the door a little bit nowadays, especially that, you know, like you're not there to beat everybody and you're not going undefeated, and understand
one of the
that.
biggest challenges when you're transitioning from MMA or any combat sport to pro wrestling is you're taught as an amateur wrestler or whatever to stay off your back.
Right.
You want to stay off your back, to all of a sudden have to be able to take a flat back bump and be on your back, and to be natural with that is very difficult. And they talk about that with Kurt Angle. They talk about how natural the transition was for him compared to other athletes, and they were just absolutely shocked with how easy it came to him, because it's just not your natural instinct when you're defending yourself to stay on your back. And that's
all right. So let's do a vote here. Who do we want to boot off first? I think Shamrock's going to the finals here. So let's see. We booting off Barnett or Brock? Joe votes we boot Brock. I vote we keep him. AJ, what do you want to do?
I actually want to get rid of Brock. I think Brock is a short. His MMA is not long enough, and you can blame diverticulitis. You can blame his training, whatever you want to blame. But he just has such a short area. Yeah, he was successful, but it's because Dana White fed him who he wanted to feed him. And to me, I'm much more impressed with the combination of Josh Barnett and what he's done than I am with Brock Lesnar.
All right, fair enough. Dan?
Yeah, I'm booing Brock. I just like Barnett. His days in Strike Force, he was very dominant there. Coming over, not only does he wrestle, but he did commentary. I thought that was a really big thing with him, commentating in New Japan. So, I have Barnett moving on.
So then again, like now we got Barnett and Shamrock, both badasses. I would pick Barnett against Shamrock in an MMA fight in their primes. I think they were both really good, but I lean towards Josh in that. Actually, I lean towards Josh as everybody in our final three, actually. But man, on the pro wrestling side, Kenny was pretty entertaining. I think WWE did.
Not only was he entertaining, his moveset was incredible. That's I mean, he delivered everything from belly to bellies to frickin' Frankensteiners, for Christ's sakes.
So what do you got?
Going to this, I got Shamrock. He's just a monster in the ring. The fact that he's still going to the degree he is says something for him in Impact.
Fair enough. AJ?
So we're all fans of MMA and wrestling. So we all enjoy both products. And if you come to one of us, we know Josh Barnett, we know Ken Shamrock. If I go to Joe Schmo on the street who doesn't necessarily watch either one, and I say Ken Shamrock, chances are they know who he is. If I say Josh Barnett, there's a real good chance they might not know who he is, unfortunately. And so for that reason, I'm going to go with Shamrock.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Shamrock too. And I think the same thing. I think not a lot of people remember Strike Force because, of course, it died. And now which card? Not UFC. Bellator is trying to be the new Strike Force, going with that Showtime deal. But not a lot of people probably know Barnett, so that's why I'm going to Shamrock.
All right,
nice. So guys. You know what the music
I'll
means.
vote Shamrock. Make it unanimous. Boom. Let's get us out of here, Joe.
By the way, check out PFL. I like the new PFL, the Fight League.
All right. And check out Cage My IQ.
Cage.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Don't miss an episode.
Let us know what you got going on.
Yeah, don't miss an episode of Cage My IQ.
And thanks so much. I have actually an interview today with UFC fighter Danny Chavez. And then I got a new business venture that I'm going to be announcing later in the week, probably on Wednesday or Thursday. So look out for that. And then I've been covering all 4 MMA promotions, which has taken a lot of my time. But there's a lot of stuff out. Like UFC's on right now. The prelims are on right now. And then the main card comes on at 4. So definitely check all that out. And then, of course, I love both MMA and wrestling. So I'm looking to do a little bit more into wrestling as well.
Nice. And we look forward to hearing it. Guys, have a good day.
Later.